very important work. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. The victims, Dr. Clancy, you talked about the victims and the science we've lost. And that's so powerful. And you seeing those people and giving them a voice and knowing the work you're doing. One of the things that we are doing in Congress is having a workplace survey. What type of workplace surveys have you found to be most effective? And I talked to a woman who implemented policies in the Navy that actually had dramatically reduced things. And they really went in and thoroughly looked at first the whole culture everyone was kind of swimming in, both the workplace, but then, for them it was a base. They went to restaurants, they went to the bars, they went to the dorms, everywhere where people were to understand. And understanding you have very young people often, which is something you have in this situation with young scientists. The military has it. We have it here in Congress. How can we intervene before these things happen? And what are some of the policies you found been the most aggressive in prevention?
Sure. I mean, that's a great question. I think that there are a number of ways that you can go at this, sort of depending on the context. Like you pointed out, when you have a bunch of young people together, or when you're thinking about a military context versus, say, an astronomical observatory versus, an anthropological field school, there are different contexts that actually have to be considered. So the most important thing is to make sure that you're involving a subject matter expert in the creation of the survey. A lot of folks think that a survey is just, hey, let's just put a bunch of questions together and figure out what happens. But just like with any experimental protocol, bad questions lead to the development of bad data, and then it's actually hard to assess over time whether you're really seeing improvement or not. So climate surveys are a really great first step, especially if you're using subject matter experts. There are a couple of validated questionnaires already out there that people often sort of use and fold into their existing survey, and you can pick and choose them depending, again, on what you know about your context. As an anthropologist, I also really like a mixed methods approach. So I think it's really important to make sure that you interview or do focus groups with folks so that you can learn more, again, about the particular context of that workplace. I think that leads to prevention because of the ways in which first assessing what's going on helps you get a sense at what the problems really are. So, for some workplaces, the culture might be like a real bro culture. And for others, it might be widespread incivility. And across the now 3 or 4 different work contexts I've started to look at, I can say that there are different historical and cultural contexts that lead to slightly different manifestations. So with a bro culture, we might want to take on sort of why is it that people think they have to act macho to be good scientists? With incivility, we can be asking, well, why is it that we're considering professional conduct that is incivil to be appropriate and respectful? So once we can start asking those questions, we can move towards change.
I want to add to that I think, a lot of times because of the confusion over what harassment is, I often tell people don't write a zero tolerance policy until you're really clear on what you're not tolerating. And so starting from what is the conduct that is actually damaging to them, not worrying about whether it's legal or illegal under the law, but really what are the things, what are the actions that are occurring that are really causing women to feel that they are being treated and are actually being treated differently, but really starting from that point of conduct versus conclusion about what that conduct is.
I wonder if there needs to be, you think some kind of checklist, sort of like when, if you're going out and you're going to be alone and you're driving home or something, you think, okay, I'm going to, you park in a certain place, you take certain actions, you're trying to protect yourself physically from safety and danger. But we don't often instruct, say, our children or young people to protect yourself in this type of environment and what to expect. And I think, and you're coming in, say, as a college student or a graduate student with all kinds of different experiences. And, particularly in a science career where it involves a lot of studying and things, and not, perhaps they haven't been engaged socially a lot, and then they're put in these circumstances. So what kind, I'm thinking there's kind of like checklists on, when you're socializing, say, with your colleagues, go with a buddy. What kind of things can we really, just sort of common sense kind of things that our mom might tell us, but that we haven't maybe thought of to prevent some of these things, because people are coming at you think culturally, somebody from one part of the country and they come into a different situation, or racially if people have different expectations, and there's just so many different approaches here, and I feel like a lot of times when these young people are getting into these circumstances, we just haven't prepared them, and how can we do that?
I certainly agree that some kind of checklist would be really important. I really think it's on the PI, the principal investigator, or the boss or the director of the field site, to be the one creating that checklist and the one responsible for it. So in our research that was published in 2014 on field sciences, we found that the majority of our respondents were not aware of a code of conduct or sexual harassment policy for their field site. And a very small number of people who were actually harassed even knew what the reporting mechanism was. So to my mind, the bigger issue is that these behaviors are not, people don't tend to just spontaneously become harassers. It has to do more with the culture that they're in and whether it's permissive. So if the director...
And they're usually, the predators are repeat offenders, too.
They can be, yeah. And I think they often are, though not always. And it has to do with the fact that if the culture is permissive of that behavior, then it's much more likely to happen. So it really has to be the person in charge demonstrating leadership and making clear what's acceptable and not acceptable in both implicit and explicit codes of conduct.
And I know one of the things that we've heard, in looking at this in Congress is, when you have these new policies in place, usually you're going to see first a spike in complaints because people feel free to come forward now. But then if there is consequences and they see that and they now know there's going to be action taken, there is then a reduction in both the activity in the first place and then sort of the confidence that this is going to be handled. Is that consistent with what you've seen? Or
yeah, absolutely. Across workplaces, it's consistent that if you have consequences, not just that you claim to have them, but that you actually have them, that people face sanctions, then you do see a reduction in harassment, or you see less harassment in those workplaces, at least.
Okay. Thank you so much, and I now yield to Mr. Lipinski.